The first time my brother spoke after 10 years of silence, he used his breath on two words that cut everything I believed in straight down the middle. Forgive her. We were in a cramped hospital room at Ridgeway in Rochester, Minnesota. Me, my wife Helen in handcuffs, a prosecutor, a couple of nurses, a deputy by the door. Michael lay in the bed he'd occupied, like a piece of furniture for a decade, eyes open for the first time, looking past the tubes straight at me. I wanted a different sentence. Tell them what she did. Tell them she left you there. Tell them I'm right. Instead, he glanced from my face to hers. Forgive her, he whispered again, like the whole room hadn't been waiting 10 years to hear anything else. If you'd told me even a year earlier that my idea of justice would hang on whether I could live with those two words, I'd have laughed. I was a simple man that way. You break it, you fix it. You sin, you pay. Then a canceled flight in a silver sedan showed me my wife had been disappearing twice a week for 10 years to sit beside the man we all thought was dead. That's where this really starts, not in that hospital room, but in an airport in Minneapolis on a Thursday in February. Minneapolis-St. Paul International Gate F12, late afternoon. I was 54, coming off a 3-day bank training. My back hurt, my carry-on was under my feet, and all I wanted was my recliner in Rochester and Helen's pot roast from the fridge. The PA crackled. Ladies and gentlemen, this is an update for Flight 1842 to Rochester. Due to a mechanical issue, this flight has been canceled. A low, tired groan moved through the gate. Once you're past 50, you don't waste much energy yelling at gate agents. You just start doing the math: how late, how long, what you'll miss. I watched the line form and felt that yellow light feeling in my chest. Not stop, not go, just wait. I called Helen. Voicemail. She'd said she had extra home visits that week. She's a physical therapist, one of the few who still drives out to work on old knees and hips, so I pictured her counting reps with some retired mechanic phone in her bag. I didn't feel like sleeping in a plastic chair. At my age, your back remembers. I opened the rideshare app and tapped home. The driver, Gary, was in his 30s ball cap and twins hoodie. We talked weather and taxes and let the city fall away until the highway and familiar exits took over. By the time we turned onto our street on the south side of Rochester, a fine drizzle had started blurring the porch lights. Our beige split level sat where it always had, same maple tree out front, same crack in the driveway. One thing was wrong. Helen's blue Corolla wasn't in the driveway. It wasn't in the garage when I hit the remote and the door rattled open either. Her being gone wasn't strange, we both had our own days, but Helen is a note leaver. A stuck late at St. Mark's, don't wait up on the counter. A with mom call if you need me on my phone. There was nothing from her since that morning's "Have a good day, Sam. Love you." I stood with my suitcase handle in my hand, Gary idling at the curb, drizzle ticking on the hood, and that yellow light feeling stepped closer. Headlights swept across our front windows from behind me. A silver sedan I didn't recognize rolled up and eased to a stop at the curb in front of our house. The driver stayed behind the wheel. A moment later, our front door opened, and Helen stepped out, locking it behind her. She wore her navy wool coat, the one she saved for funerals and Christmas Eve. Low black heels. Her hair was pulled back neat, and the lipstick was a shade darker than her usual workday color. She didn't see me in the shadows of the open garage. She checked her watch and walked down the steps with no overnight bag, no therapy kit. Just her purse. The sedan's driver got out and opened the rear door for her like a chauffeur. She nodded, slid in, and the door shut with that solid sound you hear from a good car. I heard my own voice before I'd thought it through. "Gary," I said, leaning forward, eyes on the sedan's taillights as they lit up, "can you do me a favor and follow that car discreetly?" He looked up in the mirror, one eyebrow raised. Marital trouble. "I don't know," I said. "That's what I'm trying to find out." He shrugged, dropped it into drive, and pulled away from the curb, hanging back half a block behind the silver car. Silence can mean a lot of things in a marriage comfort habit as simple tiredness. What I felt just then wasn't any of those. It felt like the kind of silence that hides something with teeth. The silver sedan led us south past the Mayo complex, glowing like a small city, through neighborhoods where porch lights blinked on against the fading drizzle. Gary kept a steady distance, eyes flicking between the mirrors and the road. "You sure this is what you want to do?" he asked. "No," I said, watching Helen's taillights. "But I need to know." We crossed the Zumbro River, took a right onto a quieter road, lined with low office buildings and assisted living centers. That part of town always smelled faintly of overwatered grass and cafeteria soup, like someplace life had slowed down to a thoughtful walk. The sedan signaled and pulled into the circular drive of Ridgeway Long-Term Care, an older facility with beige siding and too many windows, a place I'd driven by 100 times without thinking. Helen stepped out. Even from a distance, I could see the way she held her coat shut with one hand, her shoulders pinched inward. Not like she was cold, like she was bracing. She walked straight inside without looking back. "Drop me here," I told Gary. "You want me to wait?" "No. Thank you, though." Inside, the lobby greeted me with the smell of lemon disinfectant, a sharp, hospital-clean scent that lodged in the back of your throat. The receptionist at the desk looked young enough to still believe the job wouldn't wear her down. "Evening," she said. "Can I help you?" "I'm visiting," I said, glancing at the sign-in sheet. People had scribbled names beside rooms: Aunt M, Dad, Marjorie. The word family showed up more often than real names. "Who are you here to see?" I hesitated. "My wife," I said finally. "Helen Whitford. She came in a few minutes ago." The receptionist scrolled on her monitor. She checked in for room 214. "Second floor, east wing. Elevators on your left." I thanked her and walked toward the elevator, my pulse ticking faster than the soft ding of the doors opening. The hallway on the second floor was brighter too bright, every bulb fighting the dusk outside. Potted plants lined the walls, each one looking like it had given up trying months ago. Farther down, I heard a television murmuring from an open lounge, some old game show rerun. Room 215's door was cracked. I stopped just short of it. Inside, Helen sat in a chair beside a hospital bed. A man lay there motionless, thin as a shadow under the blanket. His gray hair was cropped close, and a pale scar ran from his left temple into his hairline. A ventilator hissed with calm regularity. Helen's head was bowed. Her hand rested on his knuckles. She smoothed her thumb over them again and again, slow circles like muscle memory. A gesture I'd seen her use on me when my father died. On our daughter when she broke her arm. Comfort, not professional, not distant, human. I stepped back before she could sense me. A nurse passed, woman in her 30s with tired eyes and a badge that read, Marisol. She glanced at me. "You with John?" she asked softly. "John. John Doe. That's what he's listed as. Been here 10 years. She lowered her voice. "Car accident. Highway 14. No ID. No visitors." A pause. "Until your wife showed up about 8 years ago." 8. Not 10. Meaning she found him 2 years after the crash. 2 years after my brother Michael's SUV went over the guardrail in the Memorial Day storm. 2 years after we buried an empty casket because there was nothing to recover. My mouth felt dry. "Highway 14, I said. "You're sure?" She nodded. "Ambulance report said he probably hydroplaned. They weren't even certain he was alive when he got here. He's stable now, if you can call 10 years stable." I looked down the hall toward the cracked door. Helen hadn't moved. Why wasn't he identified?" I asked. Marisol sighed. He had no wallet, no phone. Fingerprints came back empty. The identity match program the state uses got cut years ago during budget trimming. Happens more than you'd think. Folks fall through the cracks. Fall through the cracks. The phrase hung there. My brother had hands just like the ones lying still on that bed, broad at the base fingers, long from years tying fishing knots. The faint scar across the knuckle where he scraped it on Dad's old boat motor. "You okay?" Marisol asked. I didn't answer. I walked past her down the corridor, past the lounge and restroom, and a bulletin board full of flyers for grief support groups and church visits. At the end of the hall, a narrow chapel waited empty dim, holding the quiet like a fragile thing. I stepped inside. The kneeler creaked under my weight. I rested my hands on the rail and stared at the flickering electric candle by the wall. If that man in room 214 was Michael, if he'd been alive this entire time, then everything I'd accepted, every page we'd closed as a family, had been sitting 10 minutes from my house. I pressed my palms together, though I haven't prayed in 20 years. "If it's him," I whispered, "just tell me what to do." Nothing answered. Just the hum of the air vent and my own breathing. I sat there a long time before heading back out into the night, the drizzle now a steady rain, as if the sky knew what I wasn't ready to admit. I didn't go home that night. I drove around Rochester with the wipers slapping against the windshield rain, streaking the glass in long white lines. The kind of rain that makes everything look blurred around the edges, including your own thoughts. By the time I pulled into the parking lot outside my bank, the place where I'd worked for 27 years, it was close to 11. My office light was off the building dark, except for the red glow of the exit signs. But something about the place calmed me. Numbers and paperwork might bore people, but to me they were honesty. Numbers don't lie. People do. I sat there staring at the wet pavement until exhaustion crept in. Then I drove to a motel off South Broadway, checked in under my own name, and lay on top of the covers fully dressed, listening to the hum of the AC unit and the muffled sound of someone's TV through the wall. Around 3 in the morning, I made my decision. If I was going to face this, whatever this was, I needed the truth. Not hunches or scar comparisons or the ache in my stomach when I pictured my brother's hands. I needed proof. By 8 a.m., I was standing outside the Ridgeway administrator's office with a printout from a private DNA service in my hand. Companies don't usually like facilitating family testing without paperwork, but I'd made a few calls. Being a bank manager in a small city has its quirks. People owe you favors. The administrator, a thin man named Grover with a comb-over and coffee-stained teeth, looked at me like I'd delivered a subpoena. "You're asking for what exactly?" he said. "I want permission for a hair sample," I said, "from the man in room 214. "That's a medical patient. Procedures. I'll sign whatever release you want. I'll cover the costs. I'm not asking you to violate policy. I'm asking you to help me identify a man who's been lying in one of your beds for a decade." His eyes darted around his office. He looked nervous, like he'd been caught asleep at the wheel. "Look," he said, lowering his voice, "we used to have state funds for identity matching. That was cut years ago. We do our best. But we have 45 long-term residents and half of them arrived with no family. It's complicated." "Complicated," I repeated. The word made something cold settle in my chest. But to his credit, he signed the authorization. By noon, I had a small sealed envelope containing a few strands of hair, collected by a nurse under supervision. By 3, I'd paid for rushed processing $1,200 I didn't even blink at. The waiting was the hardest part. At home that evening, Helen was sitting at the dining table with her laptop open. She'd set out 2 plates, reheated chicken casserole, and a salad she'd barely touched. When I walked in, she startled like she'd heard a door slam. "You're home late," she said. "Had things to do." She folded her hands, knuckles tapping. "Sam, why didn't you answer my calls last night or today?" "I needed space." She swallowed. "Are you angry with me?" I sat across from her and studied her face, familiar, loved, but drawn in a way I hadn't seen before. The quiet she wore wasn't defensive. It was something heavier, something closer to dread. "I don't know what I am," I said. Her eyes flickered toward the sliding glass door, like escape was somewhere out in the backyard. After dinner, we retreated into separate corners of the house, her in the living room, me in the bedroom where I stared at the ceiling for hours. The next morning at 9:14 a.m., an email pinged my phone. "Your results are ready." I sat down on the edge of the bed, wiped my palms on my jeans, and opened it. The number hit me first: 99.998% probability of full sibling relationship. It felt like someone had punched the oxygen out of the room. My ears rang. My vision tightened at the edges. It was him, Michael, alive, 10 minutes from my house for 10 years. I didn't realize I'd stood up until I found myself gripping the doorframe of the hallway, steadying my legs like I'd been knocked off balance. I found Helen in the kitchen slicing carrots in that careful, methodical way she had. "Helen," I said. She looked up. "I know who he is." The knife slipped from her fingers and clattered across the cutting board. For a long moment, she didn't speak. Her eyes filled not with surprise, no, not that, but with something like inevitability, as though she'd rehearsed this moment so many times she'd worn grooves into it. She sank into a chair and covered her face. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "That doesn't answer anything." She lifted her head. "I didn't mean for any of it to happen. Sam, please let me explain." "Explain what?" I said quietly. "How my brother has been alive for 10 years without any of us knowing, or how you've been visiting him behind my back." Her face twisted as she tried to form the words. "That night," she said, "I was coming back from my mother's. It was raining so hard I could barely see. On the curve near the bluff, I hydroplaned. I tried to brake, but the car slid. I hit something. I didn't even see him until it was too late." My throat tightened. "You hit Michael," I said. She nodded, tears streaming. I stopped. I got out. Called his name even though I didn't know it was him. But there was no cell service. No lights. No movement. I panicked. I thought I thought he was gone. I stared at her, unable to speak. 2 years later, she continued, I saw a flyer for a fundraiser. Ridgeway needed money for a long-term patient who had no insurance, no family. I looked at the picture. I knew it was him. And you didn't tell me. Her voice cracked. Because every month that passed, the truth got bigger, and I got smaller. And I didn't know how to put that truth into your hands without breaking you. I turned away, pressing my palm to the wall to steady myself. She whispered, say something. But I couldn't. There's a kind of pain that doesn't shout. It just sits in your chest like a stone and waits for your heart to adjust around it. That night I slept in the guest room. 3 times I packed a bag. 3 times I unpacked. The truth was a cliff, and I wasn't ready to jump. Not yet. I woke before dawn, the guest room ceiling faintly lit by the street lamp outside. For a moment I forgot where I was. Then the memory returned in a wave. The DNA results, Helen's confession, the picture of my brother lying in that bed, the image of Helen's hand on his. I dressed quietly, drove to the station in downtown Rochester and parked in a lot slick with frost. The police building was an old beige square of a place, the kind that smells like paper dust and stale coffee. When I stepped inside, a receptionist with a crocheted cardigan pointed me down the hall to the investigations unit. Detective Paul Ramirez, mid-40s, steady eyes, crew cut, met me at the doorway. You the one who called last night about a cold case on Highway 14, he asked. Yes, my name is Samuel Whitford. His eyebrows lifted slightly at my last name. Whitford, as in the missing person case from 2015. I nodded. We sat in a small interview room with chairs that felt like they'd been designed to prevent comfort. Ramirez flipped through a thick binder, my brother's case file, and cross-referenced it with a fresh printout of the DNA confirmation I'd emailed. He murmured, tracing his finger down the report. 10 years in a long-term care facility under a John Doe listing, and no one knew. No one, I said, except my wife. He paused. You said she admitted involvement in the collision. Yes. And she didn't report it. She panicked, I said, though the words felt heavier when spoken aloud. She thought he was dead. Ramirez shook his head, not judgmental, just resigned, like he'd seen too many versions of this. Leaving the scene of an accident involving injury is a felony in Minnesota. A serious one. My stomach twisted. I wasn't here to crush Helen, but the truth didn't care what I wanted. I want the case reopened, I said quietly. He studied me for a long moment. Most folks with a spouse in trouble would avoid walking through these doors. My brother deserved better than what he got, I said. That's why I'm here. This stopped being just about my marriage the moment I saw him lying in that bed. Ramirez nodded once like he respected the clarity of that answer and closed the file. We'll reopen it. The words fell like a gavel inside my chest. That night I told Helen I'd gone to the police. She was sitting in the living room, still dressed in her work clothes, hands folded on her lap. When I spoke, she didn't blink, didn't flinch, just absorbed the words like someone who had known they were coming. They're reopening the case, I said. She swallowed. I understand. I didn't do it to punish you. I know. I did it because Michael deserves to be more than a ghost story in our family. Her lips trembled just once, then she nodded. The silence stretched between us, something fragile and sharp at the same time. I went upstairs. She stayed on the couch. I lay awake listening to the furnace kick on and off each cycle, marking how little sleep either of us was getting. By Saturday morning, word had spread through the Whitford family. I'd asked everyone to meet at Ridgeway, Mom, my younger sister Emily, cousins, uncles, even my brother's old fishing buddy Tom. About 24 people arrived, bundled in jackets, clutching coffee cups, looking confused and worried. The Ridgeway community room smelled like lemon cleaner and burnt coffee. Folding chairs squeaked as people sat down. A bulletin board behind me advertised grief groups and Wednesday bingo. Mom sat in the front row, her silver hair pulled back, her hands twisting a tissue to shreds. She was 78 now, still sharp, still proud, still grieving. I stood before them and took a breath. Thank you for coming, I said. My voice sounded too loud in the small room. I have something to tell you about Michael. A ripple of unease moved through the chairs. On Thursday, I continued. I followed Helen to Ridgeway. She's been visiting a patient here for 8 years, a John Doe. Mom covered her mouth with both hands. The man in room 214, I said carefully, is Michael. DNA confirmed it. Gasps, cries, a few curses, chairs scraping. Someone whispered, "Dear God." Mom's face crumpled. She didn't faint. My mother never faints, but she sagged into the chair like someone had drained all the bones out of her. I wasn't done. The night of the accident, Helen hit him. She didn't know it was him. She panicked. She left. And when she discovered 2 years later that he was here alive, she started visiting him 2 days a week for 8 years without telling any of us. It was like dropping a stone into a lake and watching the whole surface break. Aunt Ruth whispered, "She stole 10 years from us." My sister Emily shook her head, tears streaking her cheeks. "Sam, how could she hide something like that? How could she not tell Mom?" I swallowed, because every month she waited, it got harder to tell, and she was afraid. Mom finally lifted her head. Her voice was thin but steady. "For 10 years, she said, I've been grieving a shadow. I would have rather grieved the truth, Samuel." Her words landed in me like weight added to weight. I nodded. That's why I reopened the case. Truth can't be carried alone anymore. Silence followed, heavy but real. Later, after everyone dispersed, I drove to a cheap motel off Highway 52. I checked in, dropped onto the bed, and stared at the patterned ceiling tile like it held some kind of answer. I pulled my phone out. My thumb hovered over Helen's number. Call her, delete her, call her, delete her. I chose neither. I didn't go home for nearly a week. Motel carpet, microwave dinners, the soft hum of semis on Highway 52 drifting through the thin walls. That became my world. I went to work, kept my head down, let my co-workers assume I had the flu or an overdue project. No one over 50 asks too many questions. We've all learned. Life has private rooms you don't open for strangers. On the 7th day, Detective Ramirez called. "We're holding a joint review at Ridgeway," he said. "Hospital leadership, investigators, your family if they want to attend. We'll also take statements from Mrs. Whitford. You should be there." It wasn't a request, just a plain statement of fact. I drove to Ridgeway that Saturday morning, the January sun, a pale disk behind thin clouds. The parking lot was already half full. I recognized cars: my sister's Subaru, my cousin's rusted Tacoma, Mom's champagne-colored Buick. Inside the activity room had been rearranged rows of chairs facing a long table, where Ramirez, 2 uniformed officers, and Ridgeway's administrator Grover sat looking as uncomfortable as folding chairs would allow. A coffee urn gurgled on a side table. Someone had set out powdered donuts no one touched. People murmured, clearing throats, adjusting coats. The air felt thick, like everyone had walked in carrying history on their backs. Helen entered through the side door, flanked by an officer. She wasn't handcuffed yet, but she moved like gravity affected her more than the rest of us. She took a seat at the far end of the front row and folded her hands in her lap. Ramirez cleared his throat. "Thank you all for coming," he said. "We're here to establish a clear timeline, verify facts, and determine legal next steps regarding the incident on Highway 14 in 2015 involving Michael Whitford." A rustle moved through the room, whispers, soft gasps. I kept my eyes forward, though I could feel Mom trembling in the seat behind me. Ramirez gestured toward me. "Mr. Whitford, you may begin." I stood. My hands felt cold. "Last Thursday, I said I came home early because my flight was canceled. I followed my wife to this facility. I found her sitting with a patient listed as a John Doe." People leaned forward slightly, the way people do when truth is about to land. "A DNA test confirmed the man in room 214 is my brother Michael." I took a breath, and Helen admitted she was the driver who struck him the night of the accident. Gasps sharper this time. Helen bowed her head. Not defensive, not hardened, just accepting. Someone in the back muttered, "Lord help us." Grover, the administrator, fidgeted with his tie. "Our facility took the patient in during a severe storm. No ID, no emergency contacts. We followed protocol, but identity matching programs were discontinued at the time due to state budget." "No one asked you to defend your budget," Aunt Ruth snapped. "My nephew was alive here for 10 damn years." Grover shrank into his chair. Emily, my sister, turned toward Helen, voice shaking. "Why didn't you tell us? Why didn't you tell Mom? Why?" Helen finally spoke. "I was terrified," she whispered. "I didn't know how to hand you a truth that would break your family. Every day I waited, the truth grew heavier. And I grew smaller." Her voice cracked. I visited him to make up for what I did. I wasn't trying to replace you. I was trying to atone. I know that's not enough. Mom's voice was quiet but sharp enough to cut air. You should have given me back my son. The room went silent again, save for the quiet clatter of the heater. Ramirez took control. Legally, Mrs. Whitford's failure to report the accident will be addressed in court. Given the decade of voluntary care remorse and circumstances of the storm, the charge may be reduced. But the process must be public. Public. Good, I thought. Truth hides in darkness. Let it stand in the light for once. I didn't shout, didn't rage, I just breathed. After the meeting, reporters gathered outside the doors, microphones raised. Rochester isn't a big city, but it's hungry for stories. The headline was too tempting. Woman secretly cares for man she accidentally struck. Victim is husband's brother. Helen stepped out into the cold, blinking at the cameras. Instinct made me raise my coat to block them from her face. Old habit, reflexive, not forgiveness, just muscle memory from 22 years. She stiffened under it, flinched at being protected by the man she'd betrayed. I let the coat fall. That night in my motel room, I printed divorce papers. 2 copies. Placed one on the desk and stared at it for a long time. The room smelled of stale air and cheap detergent. The highway hummed outside the window cars going somewhere that wasn't here, somewhere simpler. I held the pen in my hand. Signed nothing. The paper stayed blank. The Olmsted County Courthouse sits on a corner downtown, a blocky building with too much glass and not enough warmth. I'd driven by it 1,000 times without imagining I'd ever be inside for something that could split my life into a before and after. Helen's hearing was set for a Tuesday morning in late February, cold enough that your breath fogged the air as soon as you stepped outside. I stood on the courthouse steps, hands deep in my coat pockets, watching her arrive with her attorney. Her wrists weren't cuffed, but the weight she carried was heavier than metal. She didn't look at me. I didn't expect her to. Inside, the courtroom smelled like old carpet and polished wood. Reporters lined the back wall pens, ready cameras raised but respectfully quiet. Helen sat at the defense table, shoulders trembling despite the still air. I took my seat behind her, close enough to hear her breath, far enough to feel the distance between us stretch like a rope pulled too tight. Judge Karen Bristow entered, a no-nonsense woman in her early 60s, with the kind of face that had seen a lifetime of people wishing they'd made different choices. She adjusted her glasses, scanned the room, and nodded. Proceed. The prosecutor, a tall man named Vaughn, laid out the case with a measured tone. 10 years ago, during a severe storm, a collision occurred on Highway 14. The victim, Michael Whitford, was presumed dead. The driver, Mrs. Helen Whitford, left the scene without calling for assistance. The victim survived unidentified and remained in long-term care. Mrs. Whitford visited him regularly for 8 years without reporting her involvement. Every word landed like a hammer. Helen's attorney, a gray-haired woman named Martha Lowe, didn't dispute any of it. Instead, she gestured to a stack of papers, visitation logs, payment receipts, medical support documentation. For 8 years, she said, my client provided emotional support to a man she believed she'd wronged. She did not hide from him. She cared for him. She understood her guilt, but she also acted on her remorse. The judge nodded thoughtfully, noted. Then Vaughn called me to the stand. I walked forward every step heavy, swore in, sat. Mr. Whitford, the prosecutor said, describe your brother. I stared at the microphone for a moment before answering. Michael was the kind of man who fixed your porch without asking. The kind who brought extra bait because he knew you'd forget. He laughed with his whole body. My voice caught. I cleared it. He didn't deserve what happened to him. And what about your wife? For the first time, Helen turned slightly as if bracing for impact. We were married 22 years, I said. She is careful, kind, thoughtful, but she's also human. And fear makes people run when they should stand still. Do you believe she meant to harm your brother? No. Do you believe she should be held accountable? Yes, I said, because truth is a debt, and eventually someone has to pay it. The room murmured. When I stepped down, I felt drained, as if every cell in my body had been wrung out. Then came Helen's testimony. She stood slowly, hands clasped in front of her. I didn't run because I didn't care, she said. I ran because I was terrified. I'd never been in an accident. The storm was blinding. When I saw the SUV go over the edge, I thought no one could have survived. I told myself it was too late to help. That lie became easier than facing the truth. Her voice trembled. And when I recognized him years later, I wanted to tell Sam. I did. Every week I told myself, next time, and every week the fear got bigger. Judge Bristow listened without emotion, then leaned forward. Mrs. Whitford, remorse does not erase responsibility, but it does inform how justice is measured. Before she could continue, the courtroom doors burst open. A bailiff hurried down the aisle and whispered urgently to the judge. Judge Bristow frowned. Repeat that, please. The bailiff spoke louder this time. Your Honor, we just received a call from Ridgeway. The patient, Michael Whitford, he's awake. Gasps rippled through the room. Helen clutched the table. I felt the world tilt. Judge Bristow stood. This court is in recess. Mr. Whitford. Mrs. Whitford, you're both to accompany law enforcement to Ridgeway immediately. The drive was a blur of sirens and thoughts colliding too fast to catch. When we arrived, nurses led us to room 214. The door swung open and the scene felt unreal. Michael's eyes were open. Not wide, foggy, tired, but open. Alive in a way I hadn't seen in a decade. A nurse adjusted his pillow. He started responding about 15 minutes ago, she whispered. I stepped forward, heart knocking in my chest. Mike, I said softly. His eyes tracked toward me with slow effort. His lips moved. Still owe me $20 for that kite, Sammy. A broken sound left my chest, half laugh, half sob. Helen covered her mouth, tears spilling. The prosecutor, stunned, managed Mr. Whitford. Do you understand why we're here? Michael blinked, struggling to piece reality together. Then they asked the question. Do you want to press charges? He turned his head slowly, painfully toward Helen, studied her. She looked like a woman ready to accept anything, prison, condemnation, the weight of every year she'd carried. His voice rasped like gravel. Forgive her. Silence filled the room, thick electric, heavy enough to make breathing difficult. A nurse sniffled. Someone whispered, my God, under their breath. And me, I felt the air leave my lungs in a rush. A part of me loved him for saying it. Another part resented him for making the road ahead so painfully clear. But the direction of my life had just shifted. Again. The judge exhaled slowly. Then the court will take his wishes under advisement. Nothing would ever be the same. The day after Michael woke up, Ridgeway felt different. Brighter somehow. Not in the lighting or the decor, that all stayed the same, worn beige and faint lemon disinfectant, but in the way people moved. Nurses walked with lighter steps. A physical therapist hummed under her breath. Even the vending machine seemed less stubborn about taking dollar bills. It was as if the whole place had been waiting for him to return. I visited early before work. Helen was already there, standing beside his bed in a soft gray sweater, her hands clasped the way people do in church when they don't know what to say. She looked smaller somehow and older, not in a worn-out way, but in a way that comes from surviving something you weren't quite sure you'd come back from. Michael's eyes followed her when she moved. They didn't track perfectly. 10 years of silence leaves its mark, but there was recognition clear as a bell. A kind of forgiveness lived in his face before he ever spoke it aloud. Morning, Sammy, he rasped when he saw me. Those two words grounded me. They were ordinary, almost casual, but threaded with history. A lifetime of shared mornings, fishing trips, sibling arguments, and quiet understanding. Morning, Mike, I said. You look better than last time. He smirked, weak but real, low bar. We both chuckled. Even Helen let out the faintest sound, half laugh, half exhale of relief. A therapist came in, all business, explaining the day's plan, simple movements, light tests, supervised breathing work. As she spoke, I stepped back, letting her take over. Helen followed me into the hallway, eyes searching mine. Sam, she began. I raised a hand gently. Not now. Not because I didn't want to hear her, but because I needed the dust to settle before I tried to walk through it. The legal aftermath moved slower than the emotional one. Following the trial shock and Michael's statement, the prosecutor and judge reassessed everything. The final decision came 2 weeks later. No prison time, but 500 hours of community service restitution payments to Ridgeway for the identity investigation they'd never completed, and mandatory counseling for trauma and guilt management. The judge had said something that stayed with me. Justice is not a scale to be perfectly balanced, Mr. and Mrs. Whitford. It is a path, and sometimes the fairest path is not the straightest one. I didn't know if I agreed, but I understood. I returned home after 6 weeks in the motel. The house felt unfamiliar, like walking into someone else's story. The kitchen chair creaked differently. The hallway light seemed dimmer. Even the coffee I brewed in the morning tasted cautious. Helen and I spoke little at first. Not out of anger, something quieter. We'd become two people standing on opposite sides of a fragile bridge, unsure if it would hold. But we kept showing up to the marriage counselor every Tuesday, the same day Helen used to visit Michael. The therapist was an older man with kind eyes who didn't force breakthroughs. He just guided us toward honesty inch by inch. One session he said, "You can repair a broken fence, but you cannot pretend it was never broken. Your job now is deciding if you're going to mend it or walk away from it." We sat with that for a long time. Meanwhile, Michael worked through rehab like a man determined to outrun time itself. Watching him grip the parallel bars for the first time, his hands shaking, reminded me of the summers we spent teaching each other to ride bikes on our gravel road in Wabasha. That same stubborn tilt of the chin, that same spark. "Don't hover," he groused when I stood too close. "I'm not a damn museum exhibit." "Fine," I said. "Fall on your face then." He grinned. "Now you sound like yourself." He remembered flashes from the night of the crash, rain headlights, the curve, but nothing about the hit or Helen's face in the storm. Some memories stay locked away to protect us. Maybe that was mercy. Maybe that was just the brain doing its job. He didn't ask for details, and I didn't force any on him. Some truths don't need retelling. One Thursday afternoon in early spring, I took him to Silver Lake Park, his idea. Helen pushed his wheelchair to the pier. The sun sat low over the water, catching on the ripples like pieces of broken glass. I handed him the green fishing rod, our father's old one. His fingers curled around it slowly, shakily, but with intent. He looked from the rod to me, to Helen. "You two gonna be okay?" he asked. I didn't give him an easy answer. People our age don't believe in tidy endings. "I don't know yet," I said, "but we're trying." Helen nodded faintly, eyes glistening. Michael let out a small, satisfied breath. "Good. Life's short, or long, depending how you look at it." He cast the line crooked, sloppy, perfect. Later that evening, back at home, Helen found me standing at the kitchen sink, staring out at the dark yard. "Sam," she said softly, "I know I can't undo anything, but I'm here, however long it takes, whatever you need." I nodded. My voice came out low and honest. "I'm not ready to forgive everything I said, but I'm ready to stop running from it." She exhaled, relief and grief mixing in one fragile sound. Then she reached for my hand, not assuming, not claiming, just offering. I let her, not because the hurt was gone, but because healing had to start somewhere. A life rebuilt at our age isn't fast or flashy. It's small choices stacked carefully like stones in a garden wall, telling the truth even when it shakes you, showing up even when you're unsure, listening even when the past roars loud. Some days I still wake at 3 a.m. thinking of the crash. Some days I wake thinking of Michael's first smile in the rehab room. Both are true. Both belong to me now. Life doesn't return what it takes, but it hands you what you need to carry next. As long as we keep carrying it together, maybe that's enough. And if you've walked through something heavy in your own life, if you've carried truths alone, or forgiven someone you weren't sure you could, then you understand what I mean. Thanks for walking with me through this story. If it stirred something in you, share it. If it made you think, subscribe. If it touched a part of your own history, you're not alone.